The sound of twisting metal still echoes somewhere in my head. I remember the smell first, burned rubber, the bitter taste of the airbag powder. My chest hurt, but my thoughts were oddly clear. She was beside me, moaning softly, asking if I could move. I nodded, trying to steady my breath. The windshield was a spiderweb of cracks, the headlights flickering in the dark rain. Somewhere behind it all, I heard sirens. Help was coming, but I was already lost in something else. A feeling that something wasn't right, not just with the car, but with us. The paramedics worked quickly. They asked for her ID, her phone, any emergency contacts. I reached into her purse to grab the phone. The screen lit up before I could even unlock it. A text flashed across the top. "Can't wait to see you again once he's asleep." It was only a preview, just that one line, but that was enough to make my stomach tighten. I remember staring at the message as if it might vanish if I blinked. The rain outside blurred everything, but that sentence burned through the haze. I told myself it could be nothing. Maybe it was her sister, or a friend, or a wrong number. Anything but what it sounded like. But as I handed the phone to the EMT, I felt the ground beneath my life shift a little. Hours later, in the hospital room, I watched her sleep. Machines beeped softly, a nurse adjusted the blanket. Her hand rested in mine, warm but heavy. I tried to focus on gratitude. We were alive. We could heal. But the message played again and again in my head like a song I couldn't turn off. Who was waiting for her, and what did "once he's asleep" mean me? When the nurse asked for her insurance card, I went through her wallet. A photo fell out, not ours, not from our wedding or a vacation. It was a picture of her in a cafe, laughing across the table at someone who had cropped himself out of the frame. My pulse jumped, but I said nothing. I smiled at the nurse, handed over the card, and tucked the photo back exactly where I found it. That night I didn't sleep. The painkillers made everything blurry, but my thoughts cut cleanly through. I realized that silence would be my best weapon. I'd wait, watch, collect truth the way I once collected memories, carefully, patiently, until the full picture formed. Morning light slipped through the thin hospital curtains, turning everything pale and unreal. Machines hummed, nurses whispered, and somewhere in the hallway someone laughed, a sound that didn't belong in my new world. I sat in the plastic chair beside her bed, pretending to scroll through my phone, pretending not to see how easily she smiled when the doctor walked in. Her voice was soft, careful, but there was no warmth in it anymore. It was like she was acting, rehearsing a version of our marriage that no longer existed. She thanked me for staying all night, squeezing my hand lightly. The touch felt strange now, as if I were holding a stranger's fingers. I smiled back, said what a husband was supposed to say. Inside, something was hollowing out quietly, carving a new space where anger used to be. It wasn't rage I felt, it was calculation. The days blurred together. I handled the insurance forms, the doctor's questions, the food trays. She complained about the bland hospital meals, scrolled endlessly on her phone, angled the screen away from me without thinking. Once, while she was in the restroom, her phone buzzed. I caught a glimpse, a new name I didn't recognize, saved with just a first initial and a heart. My pulse jumped, but I looked away. Proof had a way of showing itself without being chased. One afternoon, the nurse came in asking for her emergency contact in case of transfer. I handed over her phone and noticed she'd already filled it out, not my number, but someone else. A man's name. For a second I couldn't breathe. The nurse smiled politely, oblivious, and left. My wife caught me staring and asked, "What's wrong?" I said it was nothing, just the painkillers making me dizzy. She nodded and went back to her phone. I watched her that evening, her face lit by the glow of her screen. She laughed quietly once, the kind of laugh she used to reserve for me. I memorized the sound, the angle of her smile. Each moment became a record in my mind, evidence of distance, each lie pressed between the pages of my patience. When the discharge papers arrived, she looked relieved. I looked resolved. We drove home in silence, the rhythm of the wipers filling the space between us. She rested her head against the window, closing her eyes. I stared straight ahead, already building my plan in the quiet. If I was going to lose the woman I thought I knew, I'd at least keep the truth. In the months before the accident, our life looked like something people envied. I used to believe that too. We had the kind of marriage that photographed well, filtered smiles, matching travel bags, the house with a white fence that neighbors called storybook. Every Christmas card looked like stability. But now, replaying those years, I see the quiet fractures running through every frame. She was always the confident one, sharp, magnetic, someone who could command a room without trying. I admired that once. When I got a promotion, she planned a dinner with friends. She made the toast, not me. I laughed, proud at first, but later realized I'd become a supporting actor in my own life. Every success of mine became an accessory to her image. She was skilled at turning our life into proof of her perfection. I remember the first time she dismissed something important to me. I wanted to start a small woodworking business, a dream I'd carried since my 20s. She smiled gently, the way someone humors a child, and said, "Let's not risk what we've built." I agreed back then, thinking she meant us. Now I understand she meant her comfort. That was the start of it, the slow erasing of my voice behind the picture she painted for the world. Our friends used to say we were the couple that had it figured out. I let them believe it. I let myself believe it because the alternative, that love could become currency, was too painful to face. She managed every account, every social plan, every secret. I only started noticing how often her phone was face down, how she guarded her privacy as fiercely as I once guarded her trust. One night about a year before the crash, I came home early from work. She was sitting at the kitchen island, typing fast on her laptop. She jumped when she saw me and closed the screen too quickly. "Just planning a surprise," she said, and I didn't ask what it was. I wanted to believe her. I told myself I was lucky. Now, in hindsight, those moments feel like a breadcrumb trail leading straight to the wreckage, proof that the accident didn't break us. We were already fractured long before metal met metal. I think about how often she told me she loved me after long silences. As if love could be used to cover cracks instead of fill them. Sometimes I wonder if she even remembers the man I was at the start, someone who believed that loyalty meant safety. But the truth is, loyalty without honesty is just a slow kind of blindness, and I had been blind for years. When we finally returned home, the air inside the house felt different, too still, too rehearsed. The framed wedding photos on the mantel looked staged now, as if the people smiling in them were actors from a life I barely remembered. She walked in first, limping slightly, her bandaged wrist cradled in her other hand. "It's good to be home," she said softly, glancing around the living room. I nodded, carrying our bags inside. But even as I closed the door behind me, I felt the cold shift between us. At first I told myself that her distance was from the accident, the shock, the recovery. She moved slowly, spoke carefully, avoided eye contact, but within days I realized it wasn't trauma making her quiet, it was guilt. She guarded her phone like it contained oxygen. Every notification made her flinch, and when I asked if she needed help replying to work emails, she laughed too fast. No, just my cousin checking in," she said. Her cousin's name, apparently, started with the same letter as the mysterious contact I'd seen in the hospital. At night she pretended to sleep early. I could hear the faint hum of her phone vibrating under the pillow. Once I caught her walking into the hallway at midnight, whispering into the receiver. When I appeared in the doorway, she jumped. "Just the pharmacy," she said, covering the mouthpiece. "They mixed up my prescription." Her voice shook just enough to tell me the truth. She was lying, and badly. I didn't confront her. I smiled instead, kissed her forehead, and walked back to bed. I realized that her secrets only had power if I chased them. So I stopped asking questions and started paying attention. The first proof came from an accident of her own making. Our family laptop had always been synced to our shared cloud account. She must have forgotten that. One afternoon, while paying bills, I noticed the mail app loading messages from her phone. Out of habit, I clicked, and there it was. A string of emails confirming hotel reservations, restaurant bookings, and one receipt for a bracelet I'd never seen. My pulse slowed, not quickened. It was strange how calm I felt. I took screenshots, saved PDFs, backed up everything twice. Each file was a piece of a puzzle that would one day show her face clearly. Later that evening, she stood by the window, scrolling through her phone again, her reflection flickering in the glass. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, voice flat. I smiled, replying, "Just how lucky we are to have survived." She turned back toward me, forced a smile, and said, "Yeah, lucky." I caught her eyes for a second, and for the first time she looked away first. That night, when I closed my laptop, I renamed the folder where I'd stored everything. I called it the ledger. It wasn't anger driving me anymore, it was clarity. I wasn't planning a confrontation, I was preparing a case. It was a Thursday afternoon when I decided to tell someone. The house was too quiet, her laughter too forced when she called from the other room. I needed another voice, someone steady, someone who would see the situation for what it was. I didn't want comfort, I wanted clarity. So I called Daniel. We'd been friends since college. He worked as a paralegal at a mid-sized law firm downtown, a man who understood the value of silence better than most. I told him I needed to talk, that it was serious, and he met me at a coffee shop near the courthouse. When he arrived, he didn't bother with small talk. "You sound like a man who's been holding his breath too long," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. I told him everything, quietly, methodically, The accident, the text, the photo, the hotel receipts. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, eyes steady, hands folded on the table like he was hearing testimony. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "You're not crazy," he said. "You're just seeing what was there all along. The question is, what do you want to do about it?" "I want proof," I said. "Real proof. Enough that when the time comes, there's no argument about who destroyed what." He nodded, pulling a small notepad from his jacket. "Then you need to think like an attorney, not a husband. Every document matters. Dates, receipts, screenshots, statements. Don't confront her, don't hint, just build your record quietly." It was strange how his tone, calm, procedural, steadied me. While he spoke, the emotional noise in my head quieted. He laid out what he called *A containment plan. Secure personal finances discreetly. Collect digital correspondence with timestamps. Avoid illegal surveillance. Everything must be clean and admissible. Keep a dated journal of observations. Neutral language, no anger. He slid a manila envelope across the table. "Start with your joint accounts," he said. "People always think they can hide money, but numbers leave trails." That evening, I followed his instructions. I downloaded months of statements from our shared account. I noticed small withdrawals, consistent, round numbers, always near weekends when she claimed to be at work retreats. My chest tightened as I scrolled through the data, but I didn't react. I simply printed them, labeled each page, and placed them into the envelope. When she came home, she looked tired, distracted. "Working late again?" she asked. I smiled and said, "Just catching up." She leaned in, kissed my cheek, and went upstairs. The smell of her perfume lingered long after she was gone, sweet and sharp at once. I sat there for a long time after the printer stopped. The sound of paper feeding through the rollers had become something like therapy, each sheet proof that I wasn't imagining this, that the story I'd lived wasn't the same one she told. Before bed, I texted Daniel, started the log. "You were right, numbers don't lie." He replied a minute later, "Good, keep your voice calm and your files organized. Truth wins quietly." I stared at that message for a long time. Truth wins quietly. Maybe that was the only kind of victory I had left. At night, the house felt too big, like every room was listening. She would fall asleep early or pretend to, and I'd stay downstairs at the kitchen table with only the hum of the refrigerator for company. My laptop screen glowed like a secret lantern. The more I learned, the more I wished I didn't have to. But knowing was the only way to keep myself from breaking. Daniel had been right. Money never lies. Every transaction tells a story, and hers was beginning to read like fiction. The first trail I followed was subtle, small weekend withdrawals from ATMs near a lakeside resort about 40 miles away. Then came credit card charges from hotels that didn't match any conference she'd claimed to attend. I opened one statement and saw a purchase for a bottle of perfume she never wore around me. I printed it, dated it, placed it neatly in the ledger. I worked in silence, moving slowly, methodically. A spreadsheet began to form, columns for dates, amounts, locations, cross-checked against her supposed business trips. The pattern emerged so clearly that I stopped needing to guess. Every lie had a timestamp. Every alibi had an invoice. Once, while she was out visiting a friend, I checked the shared email backups Daniel had helped me access. There were digital receipts, hotel confirmations, rideshare logs, even an electronic room key record showing check-in for 2 guests. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, but I didn't let myself react. The emotion could come later. For now, the truth was a project that needed finishing. The hardest part wasn't finding the evidence, it was pretending not to know. I'd look across the dinner table at her, nodding at stories she invented about co-workers, her face calm, her eyes bright. I would study the way she moved her hands, how easily the lies flowed. She'd ask about my day and I'd say, just routine. And that was the truth. This had become my new routine, the quiet work of proving what she'd tried to bury. Around midnight, when I finally closed my laptop, I stared at the stack of papers in front of me. Receipts, statements, screenshots, it all looked like paperwork, but I knew it was more than that. It was the record of my awakening, proof that denial had finally run out of places to hide. Before shutting down the lights, I wrote one line in my journal, the one Daniel had told me to keep. Facts first, feelings later. That single sentence steadied me more than any comfort could have. Saturday morning came wrapped in quiet sunlight, the kind that used to mean peace. I drove downtown with the windows halfway open, letting the wind fill the silence that had taken root inside me. The manila envelope sat on the passenger seat, thick with papers, receipts, bank statements, printed emails, screenshots. It looked harmless, just office work, but I knew it contained the story of how my marriage had started to rot. Daniel had set up the appointment for me with a lawyer he trusted, Ms. Hart, a woman known for her calm intelligence and precision. Her office overlooked the river, its shelves lined with case files and a few photos of her kids. She stood when I entered, shook my hand firmly, and gestured to the chair opposite her desk. "I've looked over Daniel's summary," she said, sliding on her reading glasses. "Why don't you walk me through this in your own words?" So I did, from the accident to the text, to the nights I spent collecting evidence in silence. I expected her to interrupt, to judge, but she didn't. She listened the way a surgeon listens before an operation, attentive, deliberate, detached. When I finished, she leaned back and said quietly, "You've been building a case without realizing it." Her words felt strange, both validating and painful. She went on, explaining how fidelity clauses in prenups, even if not explicitly labeled, could influence settlements and negotiations. "Your goal isn't revenge," she said. "It's to make sure the truth is documented before emotions cloud it. Courts respect calm records, not emotional stories." She flipped through the receipts, nodding occasionally. "Everything here is admissible if gathered properly. Keep doing what you're doing, timestamp everything, avoid unauthorized access to her devices, and don't confront her until the structure is ready. You only get one chance to do this cleanly." I asked her what ready meant. She smiled slightly, the way someone does when they've seen too many people rush into battles they couldn't win. "Ready means you can walk away with your head high, knowing the paperwork speaks for you." When I left her office, the city felt different. The noise of traffic, the scent of coffee from the corner cafe, the low hum of people's lives moving forward, it all felt distant but strangely steady. I wasn't lost anymore. I had direction. That night, as she sat on the couch watching TV, I glanced at her and thought of Ms. Hart's words. "The paperwork will speak for you." It was both a warning and a promise. For years, I'd tried to fix everything with love, patience, and compromise. Now, for the first time, I realized there was another language, facts, signatures, clauses, that carried more power than all my forgiveness ever had. The days that followed felt like walking through a silent war zone, every movement calculated, every word weighed. I moved around the house quietly, no longer out of guilt or hesitation, but out of strategy. Ms. Hart's voice echoed in my mind every time I felt anger rising. "You only get one chance to do this cleanly." So I did what she told me: document, observe, and wait. I noticed things I had once ignored. The way she angled her phone away when a message came through, the quick switch to another app, the way she laughed softly at her screen before catching herself. Once she left her laptop open on the dining table, an email half written to someone saved as M. The words on the screen were casual yet intimate. "I keep replaying that night, the way you said my name when." She must have heard my footsteps because she closed it so fast I pretended not to notice. Instead, I picked up the mail, my heart pounding, and said, "You left the stove on." The pretense was exhausting, but it gave me time. I had started quietly transferring some funds into a separate account, nothing suspicious, just measured withdrawals. Each transaction left a digital trail, each dated and clean. The truth was, I wasn't preparing for confrontation anymore. I was preparing for after. Then came the smear, small at first, like a rumor whispering through air. I found out through a mutual friend that she had begun saying I'd changed after the accident, that I'd become paranoid, distant, cold. One evening, her mother called me, voice heavy with sympathy, saying, "She's worried about you. She said you've been acting strangely." That was when I realized what she was doing. She was setting up a story before mine could surface, laying groundwork to make her version of events sound more believable, and I couldn't even be angry. It was predictable, like a chess player making an obvious move. That night, I sat in my study, scrolling through the photos on my phone, our wedding day, vacations, the small anniversary dinners that felt genuine at the time. Then I opened my email and drafted one addressed to myself, attaching all the collected files and labeling them personal documentation. It wasn't dramatic, it was protection. Later, when she asked if I was okay, I looked her in the eye and said, "I'm fine." My voice was calm, detached, too calm maybe. I saw the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. The kind that told me she knew something had shifted, that I wasn't reacting the way she expected. For the first time since the accident, I felt control returning. Not the kind built on confrontation, but the quiet, unshakable kind that comes from knowing you have the truth safely stored, time-stamped, and ready to speak when you no longer need to. It happened on a Tuesday night, ordinary, quiet, the kind of night that disguises its turning points. Dinner was still half-eaten on the table. She was scrolling on her phone, pretending to laugh at something online, but I could feel it, that twitch in her voice, the way she avoided looking directly at me. For weeks, she had been moving in a pattern of guilt and deflection, and I'd been following mine: patience, documentation, silence. But tonight, the stillness between us felt like pressure building behind glass. I spoke first softly. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" She blinked, wary. "What do you mean?" "This distance," I said, my tone steady. "You're somewhere else, even when you're right in front of me." She set her phone down carefully, eyes narrowing in suspicion. "You've been paranoid since the accident. I don't know what you're implying." That word, paranoid, wasn't chosen at random. It was rehearsed, part of her smear. I almost smiled. I'd been waiting for it. "I'm not implying anything," I said. "I'm asking." The air between us went still. She exhaled, looked away, and muttered, "You're not easy to live with anymore." I leaned back in my chair, watching her. Maybe I've just stopped ignoring things. Something flickered in her expression, defensiveness turning into anger. "You're unbelievable," she snapped, rising from the table. "You think I owe you explanations for your own insecurities." Her phone buzzed on the table. Without thinking, she glanced at it, then froze. That split-second hesitation gave everything away. The screen flashed a preview, just a first name, an unfinished sentence, but enough. I looked at it, then back at her. She grabbed it quickly, too quickly. "Don't you dare." "I don't need to," I said quietly. "I already know." Her breath caught. "You've been spying on me." "No," I said, voice steady. "You've been leaving traces everywhere. I just learned to see them." For a moment, her anger collapsed into silence. She tried to recover, but something inside her had cracked. The facade was slipping. She whispered, "You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to," and stopped herself. That half sentence was enough. My phone, sitting on the counter, was already recording, not out of malice but necessity. A calm voice, a quiet record, the truth preserved in her own words. When she finally stormed off to the bedroom, I sat there listening to the echo of her footsteps fading down the hall. The house was heavy with a strange peace, like the air after lightning. I stopped the recording and emailed it to myself. No revenge, no shouting, just evidence, collected and clean. For the first time, I didn't feel broken. I felt ready. The morning after our confrontation, the air inside the house felt different, thinner, tense, full of quiet calculation. She moved through the rooms with a strange mix of guilt and defiance, like someone rehearsing innocence but forgetting their lines halfway through. The conversation from the night before hung between us, invisible but undeniable. I didn't press it. I didn't need to. Silence, I'd learned, was its own kind of evidence. She made coffee as if nothing had happened. I watched her hands shake slightly as she poured mine, then forced a smile. "Rough night," she said softly, trying for casual. "We both said things we didn't mean." But I hadn't said anything cruel. I hadn't accused, shouted, or blamed. That was what unnerved her most. I met her gaze, calm. "Yeah," I said, "rough night." The phone buzzed again, her lifeline, her secret. She flinched. This time she didn't answer in front of me. She grabbed her purse and said she had errands to run, the same vague excuse she'd used before the accident. I let her go. What she didn't know was that her reaction last night had already given me everything I needed. Later that day, I met with Ms. Hart again. She sat behind her desk, listening as I described the confrontation. When I played the short recording, her brows lifted slightly. "You didn't provoke her," she said, impressed. And she admitted to crossing a line. Legally, that matters. She leaned forward. "Now she'll likely escalate. Smear campaigns, maybe emotional manipulation. Don't respond. Stay factual. If she tries to bait you into anger, you've already won by not reacting." "Won?" I asked, half skeptical. "In legal chess," she said, "silence is checkmate if you've documented the moves." Her words stayed with me. That evening when I got home, I found the first signs of the smear she'd promised. Mutual friends had started pulling back, texting with forced politeness. Someone I'd known for years avoided eye contact at the store. The narrative had begun shifting, her version of it anyway, the worried wife of the distant husband. Instead of defending myself, I started saving messages. Screenshots of rumors, posts that hinted without namming, a thread of digital evidence to show the pattern, the preemptive deflection of guilt. I was building a map of her unraveling story, one breadcrumb at a time. By the end of the week, the house had turned into two parallel lives, her frantic energy to preserve her image and my quiet, steady path towards something colder but cleaner, truth. When I saw her packing the living room one night, whispering on the phone, I realized she wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of losing control of the story. And that, I thought, was already gone. It was almost poetic how the truth chose its own stage. A dinner, one we hadn't planned, but that her parents had insisted on hosting. They said it was time to clear the air, though I knew it was more about appearances than healing. The invitation came wrapped in polite guilt, and I accepted it without hesitation. Ms. Hart's words guided me like a compass: keep your dignity. Let the receipts do the talking. The restaurant was one of those places with dim lighting and soft piano music, somewhere people whispered rather than spoke. Her parents arrived first, followed by her, impeccably dressed, her expression carefully neutral. She greeted me with a small nod, the kind that says play along. Her mother started with small talk, all forced warmth and avoidance. We've all been worried, she said, glancing between us. It seems like there's been some misunderstanding. I smiled slightly. I wouldn't call it that. Her father cleared his throat. Marriage takes patience. Sometimes pride gets in the way of fixing what's broken. That was when she leaned forward, her voice soft but sharp around the edges. He's been distant for months. After the accident, he changed. He's suspicious of everyone. I watched her perform, measured, sorrowful, perfectly practiced. She was painting me as unstable, trying to frame the evening as an intervention. I let her talk. Every word added another brushstroke to the picture she wanted them to see. When she finished, I opened my folder, the same manila envelope that had sat beside me for weeks, quietly filling with facts. I placed it gently on the table. Since we're clearing the air, I said evenly, it might help to look at what's actually been happening. Her mother frowned. What is that? Documentation, I said, proof. Her face went pale. You don't need to do this, she whispered. But I did. Calmly, I slid out the printouts, dates, screenshots, transaction records, a copy of the recording transcript. I didn't change after the accident, I said quietly. I just stopped ignoring reality. Silence fell. Her father adjusted his glasses, scanning the first page. The truth was there, plain, unemotional, undeniable. No shouting, no scenes, just the quiet sound of paper sliding across the table. When he looked up at her, the disappointment in his eyes was more cutting than anything I could have said. Is this true? He asked softly. She didn't answer. Her breathing quickened, her eyes darting between us, searching for an escape that didn't exist anymore. I stood, placing the final document, a separation agreement Ms. Hart had drafted, on the table. This isn't revenge, I said, voice low but steady. It's closure, and it starts today. Then I left the table, not with anger but with peace. Behind me I heard the faintest sound of someone exhaling, the sound of a story collapsing under its own lies. The fallout didn't happen in an explosion. It came quietly, like a slow unmasking. The morning after the dinner, the house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. She didn't come home that night, and I didn't expect her to. There were no calls, no texts. Just the faint echo of her parents, stunned faces replaying in my mind, the way her father had taken off his glasses and looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. By noon, I received an email from her, short, defensive, and void of apology. You humiliated me. You had no right to bring my family into this. I hope you're proud of yourself. I read it twice, then forwarded it to Ms. Hart. She replied within minutes, keep it, don't respond, it's emotional bait. She was right. Every word in that email was written to drag me back into the noise, to make me react. But I was long past reaction. I was in the business of closure now. Over the next few days, I learned that the truth had begun to spread, not through me, but through the quiet conversations her parents had after that dinner. Friends who had once turned cold started to reach out again, cautiously, with messages like I didn't know the full story and you handled that with grace. The smear had collapsed under the weight of its own inconsistencies. Meanwhile, Ms. Hart handled the legal side with surgical precision. The separation papers were filed, the financials audited, and a restraining order drafted, not out of hostility but necessity. The documents were clean, every number accounted for, every word chosen to prevent future chaos. When she told me the first hearing date, she added softly, "You've done something most people can't. You kept your composure when it mattered most." I spent the evenings alone in the house, sorting through the remnants of what used to be a life built on illusion. I found wedding photos, anniversary cards, gifts that once held meaning. For a moment I thought about throwing them away, but I didn't. Instead, I boxed them neatly, labelled the carton past, and slid it into the storage closet. A week later, a mutual acquaintance told me she had moved in with M, the man behind the messages. It should have hurt, but it didn't. Not anymore. Because pain only thrives where confusion lives, and I finally had clarity. She wasn't my problem to fix. She was simply a chapter that ended where truth began. That night, I walked out onto the porch, feeling the weight that had sat on my chest for months slowly lift. The air smelled like rain, and for the first time it didn't remind me of the accident, it reminded me of starting over. The court date arrived with an almost surreal calm. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant, the sound of footsteps echoing down marble halls like a slow metronome. I sat on one side of the waiting area, documents neatly arranged in a folder Ms. Hart had prepared for me, each page tabbed and labelled. Across from me she sat with her lawyer, a man who looked uncomfortable, as if he already knew the case wasn't in his favour. She didn't meet my eyes, and I didn't try to find hers. There was nothing left to exchange except silence. Ms. Hart joined me, poised as ever. "We'll keep this straightforward," she said, her tone steady. "You've already done the hard part, staying calm. Today is just confirmation." When our names were called, the room felt smaller than I imagined, just a judge, a clerk, and a handful of quiet observers. My heart beat steadily, not from nerves but from something else, finality. It was strange, after months of chaos, to sit in a room where truth was no longer debated, it was documented. Her lawyer began with the expected argument, that I had invaded her privacy, that my recordings were unethical, that my emotional distance had driven her actions. Ms. Hart didn't interrupt. She waited, patient as a chess master, then slid a single page forward when it was her turn. "Your Honour," she said evenly, "the recording was made in a shared home where no reasonable expectation of privacy was breached. What matters is the content." She played a short excerpt of the audio, the sound of my wife's voice saying, "You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to happen." The words hung in the courtroom, clear and soft, echoing off the walls. There was no drama, no gasp, just quiet recognition. Then came the receipts, transaction logs showing transfers to an unknown account, screenshots of messages, and timestamps matching the days she'd claimed to be working late. Each page landed like a quiet verdict, each proof replacing the need for words. Her lawyer tried to redirect, but the damage was done. The judge glanced at her, then at me. "Mr. Hale," he said calmly, "you've exercised restraint and diligence in a situation most would have met with chaos. The evidence is clear." He turned to her. "Do you contest these findings?" She didn't answer, her hands were trembling. Her lawyer placed a hand on her shoulder, whispering something that looked like "don't." When the judge signed the preliminary order, dividing assets, confirming separation, and granting me sole control over the shared home, there was no sense of victory. Just release. I'd won nothing but peace, and it was enough. Afterward, outside the courthouse, Ms. Hart shook my hand. "You did well," she said. "You turned pain into precision. That's rare." I looked at the courthouse steps where sunlight poured through the clouds. "I just stopped fighting what I couldn't fix," I said. And with that it was over. Not in a blaze of fury, but in the quiet language of closure, signatures, seals, and silence. The week after the hearing felt like waking up from a long, cold dream. The kind where you don't realize how exhausted you've been until you finally rest. I didn't celebrate. There were no toasts, no relief-filled phone calls, just quiet mornings, the smell of coffee, and a house that had never sounded this still. For the first time in months, silence wasn't heavy, it was healing. I started rebuilding my days piece by piece. Work came first. I threw myself into projects I'd put off for years, the ones I'd always postponed with the excuse that life was too busy. My colleagues noticed the change. One even said, "You look lighter, like you finally dropped a weight." They didn't know how right they were. In the evenings, I took walks around the neighborhood, the same streets I used to drive through in a hurry. Now I moved slowly, noticing the way the sunset caught on the rooftops, the sound of kids playing in driveways, the rhythm of normal life returning. I wasn't looking for meaning, I was relearning presence. Sometimes, late at night, I'd catch myself scrolling through old photos, not out of longing but out of gratitude for the lesson hidden inside them. Every smile in those pictures carried a reminder that peace built on pretending isn't peace at all. It's a slow erosion of self, and once you see it, you can't go back to blindness. I reached out to Daniel one afternoon and thanked him, not just for introducing me to Ms. Hart, but for reminding me that boundaries weren't cruelty. "You didn't just protect yourself," he said. "You modeled what fairness looks like when it's done right." His words stuck with me. For years, I'd equated strength with silence and forgiveness with surrender. Now I was learning that real strength was knowing where to stop giving chances. A few weeks later, I got an email from Ms. Hart. It wasn't about legal paperwork. It was a note that said, if you ever want to share your story anonymously, there are support groups that could really use your perspective. People respect calm voices of truth. I thought about it for days. The idea of turning something painful into something useful felt right. I didn't want revenge, but maybe I could offer something else. Clarity for people standing at the same crossroads I once did. That night I opened my laptop and began writing, not a confession, not an accusation, but a reflection. The title came easily, The Power of Quiet Proof. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about learning to walk through fire without letting it burn your soul. The first time I spoke about what happened, my voice trembled, not from pain, but from the strange relief of honesty. It wasn't a grand stage or a viral moment. It was a small support meeting held in the back of a community centre on a rainy Thursday night. Folding chairs, warm coffee in styrofoam cups, and the soft murmur of people carrying their own quiet wars. When it was my turn, I didn't use names. I didn't speak like a victim or a hero. I just told the truth in plain, steady words, the kind that don't try to impress, only to heal. I talked about how silence can protect you, how receipts can give you a voice when emotion fails, and how walking away doesn't mean losing. It means choosing dignity over chaos. People listened, not with pity but with recognition. A man in the corner wiped his eyes. A woman nodded through most of my story as if she'd lived it too. Afterward, a few stayed behind to thank me. One said quietly, "You made it sound survivable." That sentence stayed with me the whole drive home. That night I realized something Ms. Hart had hinted at but I hadn't fully understood. Justice isn't just legal. It's emotional. It's reclaiming your narrative after someone else tried to twist it. And once you do, the echo of that act doesn't stop with you, it ripples outward. The next week, I received an invitation to speak at a small non-profit event that helped people navigate separation and financial recovery. They'd heard about my calm handling of the situation through mutual contacts. I hesitated at first. I wasn't sure I wanted to be the guy with the story. But something in me knew it wasn't about me anymore. It was about showing people that quiet power can still roar in its own way. At the event, I stood behind a modest podium, a slideshow of anonymized documents projected behind me. I explained how simple things, a screenshot, a note, a bank record, could be the thread that unravels a lie. But more importantly, I spoke about composure. There's strength, I said, in choosing facts over fury. You don't have to break to prove you were wronged. Afterward, people came up to talk, not just about their struggles, but about how they planned to protect themselves differently. That night, as I drove home, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: purpose. It wasn't about exposing anyone anymore. It was about exposure of a different kind, the light that finds you when you finally stop hiding behind pain. It started as an idea scribbled in a coffee-stained notebook, a small way to turn everything I'd endured into something that might spare someone else the same kind of pain. I called it the Ledger Project. The name came to me one quiet morning when I was reviewing my own documentation one last time before filing it away for good. I realized those receipts, those bits of truth, hadn't just saved me legally. They'd saved my sense of self. Every line of evidence had been a reminder that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't imagining what was being done to me. Proof had become a kind of therapy. So I started reaching out to local community centres, small legal aid organisations, and even a retired paralegal I'd met through that support group. Together, we built a small volunteer network to help people quietly document their truth. Nothing grand or flashy. Just templates, step-by-step guides, and calm reassurance for those too afraid to speak up but too exhausted to keep quiet. The first few meetings were small. Maybe 5 or 6 people gathered around a donated conference table, each of them clutching folders or phones full of screenshots. I remember one woman, Maria, trembling as she shared that her husband had been draining her shared savings for months. She whispered, "I don't even know where to start." I smiled gently and handed her one of the checklists I had made, the same one I used for myself months ago. "Start with the facts," I said. "Everything else can follow." Watching her shoulders loosen just slightly was like watching my own past self exhale for the first time. That's when I knew the Ledger Project wasn't just about receipts, it was about recovery. Proof as peace. Eventually, the project gained momentum. A few local news outlets picked up on the story. They called it a quiet movement for private justice. I liked that. Quiet was exactly how it needed to be. No shouting, no public shamming, just people reclaiming their power through preparation and documentation. One afternoon, as I was closing up the centre, a man around my age stopped me. "You don't know me," he said, But your story, it stopped me from making a really bad decision. I was ready to go loud, ruin everything. Then I watched how you handled yours. You made me realize there's another way. I shook his hand and nodded. That moment felt heavier than any apology I could have gotten from my ex. That was real closure. I sometimes still think about her, but not with bitterness. More like a scar that no longer hurts but reminds you how deep the cut once went. I learned that peace doesn't always come with forgiveness. It comes with distance, structure, and purpose. And as the Ledger project grew, so did that peace. The day the email arrived, I almost deleted it. It looked like one of those too good to be true messages, subject line in bold, feature request, quiet justice in action. It was from a producer at a national talk show that focused on resilience and reinvention. They'd heard about the Ledger project through a legal aid conference, and they wanted to feature me in an episode called Turning Betrayal into Blueprint. For a moment, I hesitated. I had spent so much energy staying grounded, avoiding the spotlight, keeping my dignity intact through calm silence. But then I thought about all the people who came through our workshops, each one quietly desperate for proof that their pain didn't have to end in ruin. Maybe this was a way to amplify that message, not my story. On the day of the tapping, I wore the same navy suit I'd worn to my first mediation meeting. It wasn't about nostalgia, it was about reminding myself where I came from and who I'd become. The studio lights were warmer than I expected. When the host introduced me, her tone wasn't sensational, it was respectful. "He turned heartbreak into help," she said. We sat across from each other, cameras rolling, and she asked the question everyone always does. "When did you realize it was time to let go?" I smiled, just slightly. When I understood that letting go doesn't mean forgetting, it means refusing to be defined by what broke you. The audience was silent, not the awkward kind of silence, but the kind that means people are really listening. Throughout the segment, clips played of our community center, of volunteers guiding others through documentation steps, of small victories shared in quiet voices. The producers had even interviewed Maria, the woman who once sat trembling at that table. She looked into the camera and said, "He showed us that truth doesn't have to be loud to change everything." That line hit me harder than I expected. When the episode aired, messages flooded in from across the country. People sent letters, emails, even handwritten notes. Some shared stories of survival, others simply thanked me for showing that there's power in composure. One letter stood out from my ex-wife's mother. She wrote, "I watched. You showed more grace than anyone had a right to. I'm sorry for what you went through. Thank you for not returning cruelty for cruelty." I sat with that letter for a long time. There was no anger left, no bitterness, just peace. I folded it gently and placed it in the same box that once held my receipts, the old ones that started it all. A full circle of truth. The days after the interview felt strangely calm, like the quiet that follows a storm, not empty, just settled. Emails and messages continued to pour in, but what stood out weren't the congratulations or praise. It was the stories. Every day I read new messages from people who had found the courage to gather their own proof, set boundaries, and walk away from chaos with their dignity intact. Some had even started local groups modeled after the Ledger project. They sent photos of community halls, printed checklists, and handwritten "Thank you" signs taped to bulletin boards. One evening, while sorting through the messages, I got a call from Ms. Hart. Her voice carried that steady warmth that had grounded me from the start. "You realize what you've built, don't you?" she said. "This isn't just a project anymore, it's a blueprint for emotional integrity." I chuckled softly. "I just wanted to help people breathe again," I said. She replied, "You did, but you also gave them structure. That's rarer than you think." A few weeks later, a foundation specializing in restorative justice reached out with an offer to partner with the Ledger project. They wanted to fund an educational program, seminars, online resources, even a mentorship platform. I remember sitting across from their director in a glass-walled office overlooking the city skyline. He leaned forward and said, "Your method works because it's not about vengeance. It's about evidence and empathy. We need more of that." I agreed to the partnership, but with one condition. The focus had to remain personal, not performative. No celebrity endorsements, no exaggerated storytelling. Just real people, real proof, real peace. The director nodded, smiling. "That's exactly why we chose you." When the partnership was announced publicly, I expected attention, but what I didn't expect was the feeling that came with it. It wasn't pride. It was humility. Knowing that something born from heartbreak could grow into hope for others, it felt almost sacred. Later that month, I stood at a small ceremony where the first batch of Ledger Fellows, young advocates trained in calm conflict documentation, received their certificates. They were nervous, eager, and full of purpose. I told them, the truth doesn't shout, it doesn't rush, it just waits for you to notice it and stand beside it. The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was deep. As the crowd dispersed, I stayed behind for a moment, looking at the certificates laid out on the table. The ink was still fresh. I thought about the accident, the betrayal, the nights I spent questioning my worth. And then I thought about the faces I had just seen, strong, steady, ready. It felt like every broken piece of my story had finally been put to work building something whole. The night of the gala arrived with a kind of quiet reverence. It wasn't extravagant, no flashing lights or celebrity guests, just warm amber lighting, a string quartet, and rows of tables filled with people who had once sat in small rooms with trembling hands, clutching documents that told stories of pain and perseverance. The Ledger project had grown far beyond what I'd ever imagined. That evening wasn't just about celebrating an organization. It was about honoring the courage of those who refused to be defined by betrayal. I walked in wearing a simple black suit. No entourage, no speechwriter, just me, a few note cards, and the feeling of closure settling softly on my shoulders. Ms. Hart was there, of course, seated near the front, her proud smile unmistakable. The foundation director stood at the podium, introducing me with words that felt both surreal and grounding. He turned personal evidence into communal empowerment. Tonight, we honor the strength behind the silence. As I stepped up to the stage, I took a deep breath and scanned the room. Among the guests were faces I recognized: Maria, who had once been too afraid to speak, the young advocates from the fellowship program, volunteers who had turned late nights and broken pasts into structured hope. For a moment, I didn't see an audience. I saw a mirror of everything I'd gone through, reflected back at me in different forms. I began my speech not with triumph, but with truth. I once thought proof was something you showed others to be believed, but I've learned that sometimes it's something you gather to believe yourself again. The words seemed to settle into the air, quiet but heavy. I shared glimpses of the journey, the accident, the betrayal, the long months of restraint, and the calm reclamation that followed. I never mentioned her name, I didn't need to. The lesson wasn't about her. It was about what I had built from the wreckage she left behind. Halfway through the speech, I paused and lifted a small wooden box from the podium, the same one that had once held my receipts, evidence, and letters. This, I said, was where I kept my pain organized, but tonight I want to return it to what it was meant to be, a place for truth, not proof. Inside the box were new items, photos of Ledger project members, scholarship certificates, notes of gratitude. I closed the lid slowly and smiled. This box isn't mine anymore. It belongs to the people who refused to give up. The audience stood in applause, not wild but warm, genuine. Even Ms. Hart wiped away a tear. I felt the weight in my chest lift, not because of recognition, but because I had finally released the last remnant of what tied me to the past. The box, once a symbol of betrayal, was now a vessel of rebirth. After the applause faded, I stayed at the podium for a moment longer, just breathing. I looked out and said softly, "Healing doesn't erase history, it reframes it." And in that moment, I understood that my story was no longer mine alone. It had become a collective testament to dignity, boundaries, and quiet strength. When I stepped down, people approached me one by one. Some hugged me, others simply nodded with gratitude. The final person to greet me was Maria. She handed me a small envelope and whispered, "It's from someone who couldn't be here." Later, when I opened it, I found a short handwritten note from my ex-wife. It read, "You were right to walk away. Thank you for doing it with grace." I didn't feel vindicated, I felt free. Morning light filters through my curtains differently these days. It's softer, unhurried, as if the world has finally decided to meet me at my own pace. I still wake early, make the same black coffee, sit by the window and check my notes for the day, but now those notes aren't lists of battles or evidence. They're reminders of meetings with young advocates, community partners, and quiet survivors who have found the courage to rebuild their lives. The noise of the past has finally gone silent, replaced by purpose. Sometimes when I walk into the Ledger Center, I pause at the entrance just to listen. The hum of conversations, the tapping of keyboards, the laughter from one of the mentorship rooms, it all feels alive, grounded, and peaceful, proof of life after chaos. There's a framed quote on the wall that one of the fellows hung up without telling me. "Truth doesn't end things, it begins them." Every time I see it, I smile. It's strange how something so simple can capture the entire arc of a life. I found that forgiveness isn't something you give away, it's something you grow into. I never went looking for it. It just found me quietly one ordinary afternoon while filing paperwork and realizing I hadn't thought about the betrayal in months. It wasn't gone, it was just irrelevant. The hurt had lost its language. A few weeks ago, I received a letter from a couple who had used the Ledger project templates to navigate their own separation with calm dignity. They ended their note with, "Your story didn't just save us, it gave us a way to part without hate." I read that line twice, maybe 3 times, and something inside me settled even deeper. I realized then that the truest measure of healing isn't forgetting the wound, it's being able to help others while carrying the scar without shame. On the anniversary of the accident, I visited the site for the first time since it happened. The road had been repaved, new streetlights installed. There was no trace of the moment that once split my life in two. I stood there for a while, listening to the sound of cars rushing by, and whispered a quiet thank you to the universe, to fate, to every painful turn that brought me here. Then I left a single folded note under a nearby rock. It read, "Some endings are just beginnings with better boundaries." When I got back to my car, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The past had already served its purpose. Now, when people ask me what the Ledger project truly means, I tell them it's not about revenge or proof. It's about remembering who you were before the world tried to convince you otherwise. It's about restoring the quiet power of your own voice, documented not in anger, but in clarity. So yes, I was betrayed. Yes, I was broken. But I was also rebuilt, stronger, steadier, and softer where it mattered. The kind of strength that doesn't roar anymore, it simply exists. And in the quiet of that existence, I've found something better than closure: continuity.